I was never taught what laws there are. I was never taught what laws there are.
I don't know if 3 months ago is too long ago in the internet archives, but people got a bit mad about things on the internet when Demon Mama and Hans of Harkia had a bit of a heated debate about anarchism and the concept of mandatory schooling. It's all a bit weird, and I don't want to dwell on internet drama this long after it's faded into obscurity. That wouldn't be very good of me, I think, especially since I don't know anyone involved with the drama too intimately. But everyone and their mother has come out with their takes about this drama, adding nuance to the discussion, coming up with alternative perspectives, and trying to find a midpoint between the two positions, and then Hans asserting that that midpoint is where he was coming from after all. Meet me in the middle, says the unjust man. You take a step forward, he takes a step back. Meet me in the middle, says the unjust man. For a timeline of events, Hans and Demon Mama have a wee debate about how to make schooling better. Hans was coming into this debate with the assertion that some form of education is good and necessary in order to function in society and live a life that's as free as possible. And as a result, we should ensure that children have no way of going without that education, using state power if necessary. Demon Mama was coming into this debate with the assertion that instead, we should limit the ways in which we convince children to go to school. Coercion is a bad thing, and we should aim to minimize that coercion as much as we possibly can. And naturally, as blood sports tend to do, this debate came to a very heated end, and it's kind of sparked a bit of discourse, and Hans's subsequent downfall into DGG communities. But Hans, like an absolute Chad, went on a whole tirade on Twitter and within his community over the next day or so, where he'd get people who were mad at him on twitter.com to debate him, in kind of a Riley Grace Rochon kind of way, all while not realizing that a lot of the conversations he's bringing up are a lot more nuanced than 3 yes or no questions. It got so bad to the point where honestly it just felt like he was bringing up a line of people he could bully in front of his community. Fast forward a day or two, a bunch of creators have made their own videos on this topic, adding their own nuances, coming out as #enlightened centrists on this issue, where they agree that schools should be improved and that government coercion is bad, but not quite putting those two together in the same way that Demon Mama was trying to assert. So I thought I'd try to do that in this video, try to come to a defense of this whole conversation, and try to leave this mess of a discourse a little bit better than I found it. And that's not particularly hard. In this current world, some form of literacy, numerical, and cognitive capabilities are pretty much necessary to survive independently in any capacity. If you don't have any way of gaining those skills, or you're impeded enough from getting those skills, then you're going to be somewhat removed from the functioning world. That's not really something that's up for debate. That'll probably maybe change in the future when we have enough robots to do all the dirty work, and we don't need that form of education, and we can just vibe it all out. But that's not currently the world we live in. But let's also dive into a little bit of child psychology. Children who aren't yet disillusioned with the world due to trauma or self-awareness want to learn. Learning and sociability are the only 2 sections of the human condition that I feel comfortable saying are innate to humans. Teach a monkey to make a spear, and it'll have a spear. Teach a human to make a spear, they'll show the rest of their tribe. It's why young kids like to touch hot stoves. They just want to know things. They want to know how it feels to touch the pretty orange dancing lights, and they don't know that they'll cry for an hour afterwards. So if we want to have people educated enough to perform in this world, we should probably find a way to capitalize on that curiosity. Enter public schooling. There is a social system that exists to try and channel that childhood interest in the world around them into making upstanding adults who trade hours of helpful labor for precious value coin. So surely people within that social system, who all have bundles of empathy and compassion for their local community and the members in it, should care a lot about that system and what goes into it. Right? Wrong. That's not true. School sucks. It's well known by now. A lot of kids would rather stay at home and not learn than go to school. So the question becomes, how do you get those kids to go to school? You make it mandatory, of course, and you enforce that by issuing fines to parents whose kids don't go to school for some reason. Even if that school is prime suspect within the school-to-prison pipeline, genocides native populations, and fields teachers who are abusive towards students because sometimes they just can't afford to replace them. However, mandatory schooling comes with a lot of problems. Firstly, that the priority shouldn't be to force kids to go to school. It should instead be making school better enough that students aren't traumatized by school or fed into a cycle of crime by their school or literally genocided by their school to the point where they really don't want to go. Secondly, the evidence that mandatory schooling actually reduces truancy rates is pretty tenuous. There is insufficient evidence that truancy rates actually go down enough as a result of stricter punitive policy towards kids who don't go to school. And pretending that there's some hypothetical kid that mandatory school would help does not make that point. And thirdly, the question that Hans got a bit too hung up on is that even if that evidence is confirmed to be a lot more there, maybe that shouldn't be the only priority of school. I've said school so much it's hard to even recognize the word at this point, because if kids are, again, getting traumatized and or genocided by their school, and they want to not be traumatized and or genocided, they should probably be allowed to not do that without their parents being fined up to 3 months worth of potentially life-saving rent money for not showing up to school just because that kid is crying themselves to sleep, even if that kid would otherwise not get an education. Another solution to this is maybe, just because someone doesn't get an education, maybe they shouldn't be left on the street to starve? Maybe we should have some form of social safety net that allows people to not go homeless just because they were suffering from severe school-induced trauma during the time that they were being given an education. I think that threat being placed upon people within our world, which we all have bundles of empathy and compassion towards supporting, isn't an overly good thing. I'm gonna say it, coercion is bad. With a caveat though, some things are worse than coercion. I think that coercing a child out of drinking out of a pretty bottle because it's bleach is a moral thing to do, and is a lot better than letting them die. Two things can be bad at the same time. This doesn't mean though that coercing a child to not drink something isn't usually a bad coercive thing. Just that in this case it is justified because the child dying is a worse outcome. If we're talking about in an ideal world though, where the schooling system was 100% effective in teaching kids about anything they'd need to know and improving their overall quality of life, wasn't racist or genocidal or abusive, and was universally extremely enjoyable, then would forcing someone into that system be a good thing? I don't know. I think that by that point, we'll probably have progressed enough as a society that our education would be almost entirely optional. And if that child wanted to stay at home and play video games all day, well, higher quality of life involves freedom. And if ignorance is bliss, then Godspeed.